My name is Jamal Watson, and welcome to Diverses in the Margin. Earlier this year, the University of Phoenix and Jobs for the Future announced a partnership to drive equitable economic advancement for Black learners and workers. With funding from the University of Phoenix, Jobs for the Future will conduct in-depth research analyzing existing strategies for the development of social capital that are being implemented by higher education institutions and employers. This work will inform the creation of an evidence-based, actionable framework and raise awareness about the role of professional social capital in economic advancement. I am pleased today to be joined by Michael Collins, Vice President for Jobs for the Future, and Dr. Kimberly Underwood, Associate Faculty and Research Chair at the University of Phoenix. Welcome to you both. Mr. Collins, let's start with you. Tell us a bit about yourself and also about Jobs for the Future.
Absolutely. I'm Michael Collins. I'm Vice President of Jobs for the Future. Jobs for the Future is a national nonprofit. We've been around for 40 plus years, and we exist to transform our nation's education and training system to create equitable advancement for all.
Wow, that's wonderful. And Dr. Underwood, of course, I am familiar with your pioneering work on diversity and the work that you've done around Black males in particular. But I'm hopeful that you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your work at the University of Phoenix, and also including the recent creation, is my understanding, of the University of Phoenix Career Institute.
Absolutely. And first and foremost, thank you so much for having me today. And so Kimberly Underwood, I'm the University Research Chair for the Center for Workplace Diversity and Inclusion Research at the University of Phoenix. I've been in this position for 5 years, but I've been with Phoenix for about 10 now. And, you know, it's amazing to be able to do this type of work, and specifically looking at those elements of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace. A big part of my work is also working with the Career Institute here at University of Phoenix. And coming from this work within the Career Institute was this partnership with JFF. And so just really happy to be here, both with you and with Michael.
Yeah, I mean, the partnership and relationship between University of Phoenix and Jobs for the Future seems like there's a lot of synergy there. So I'm really excited to hear about where this relationship goes. So let's start off with talking about how we define social capital, because we're going to talk about social capital. I want to make sure that we're speaking the same language. So Dr. Underwood, can you give me kind of your definition of social capital, and then we'll pivot to Mr. Collins.
Sure. And so, you know, and one of the things that I have to preface this with is that social capital needs equity in order to really exist and thrive. And so when we're talking about social capital, we're talking about those resources that arise and that we build throughout, you know, our lifetime, through these relationships and through these interactions with others and through our own professional development that allow us to pretty much, you know, achieve some type of advancement or to thrive within, you know, the workplace, within education, and allow us to access, you know, new opportunities in these spaces.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Mr. Collins?
Yeah, I would agree with that definition. You know, kind of loosely, it is about kind of the resources and relationships that provide opportunities for advancement. In the case of the JFF and University of Phoenix partnership, we care most about what we call kind of the professional social capital. It's the kind of social capital that provides access and opportunity in the labor market. So this is kind of the relationships that are conducive to information about opportunities, and also even action, right? So it's not just about kind of information and relationships, it's about activating, right, kind of those relationships on behalf of opportunity in the labor market, as in, you know, kind of jobs and advancement, and not just kind of first job, but kind of, you know, job over working life, right? How do you build and maintain? So we see social capital as really a critical variable, right? Like in the completion plus, you know, kind of economic mobility equation.
And I'm so happy you all are talking about it, because I don't hear that term really used as
Yeah.
much as it should be. I mean, would you agree that there's really a need to develop a conversation about social capital?
100%. So in this country, we have what I call the college mobility narrative, right? And it's the story we've told ourselves about what college does, for us. So the story goes, you go to college, you get out, you get a job, and kind of you just have upward economic mobility. What's left out in that story? It matters, like kind of where you go to college, what you study, who you meet when you're in college, and what those relationships that you kind of developed in college can do for you afterwards, right? So like in my mind, we don't talk as much about social capital because in some ways it's intuitive for kind of upper middle and like those communities. They are in some ways doing it by default. It's not as clear to someone from say kind of a low income background that's going to college for the first time. They may think that they kind of are already at the finish line just by going to college, and they might study hard kind of every night, not really understanding that they might want to kind of get out and kind of meet some of the people kind of on campus that can open some doors for them. It's super important to know whether it's the, somebody that's a tutor, a financial aid officer, the librarian, these incredibly important relationships that can help you actually navigate through college, right? Because you want to do that before, you even think about labor market opportunity. But how are you connecting to resources on campus that are around kind of internships, work-based learning? Have you connect with the career services people? All of that in some ways is not visible to someone who doesn't understand how the kind of the process works. So we haven't heard a lot about it because in some ways it's invisible, but like air, just because it's invisible doesn't mean that it's not right there and important.
Yeah, no, that's important. Dr. Underwood,
Yeah.
did you want to add anything?
And I think I do. I think that, one of the things is when we think and when we talk about social capital, we're talking about it, but I think we're talking about it in this fragmented kind of way where, we may be talking about mentoring as, one element of social capital, and then we focus on mentoring. Where we need to start looking at social capital as this collective type of process with many players, with many types of actions, with many types of resources involved in that collection, and looking at it from early on. We start talking about mentors and mentoring in higher education, but even thinking about K through 12 and starting looking at that trajectory there, moving into higher education, and then, getting into these workplaces and these communities of practice. And one of the things that we see, for instance, is when we talk about women in STEM or people of color in STEM, we spend a lot of money when we talk about K through 12 in preparing students for STEM and then getting them into, higher education and trying to fill these underrepresentations within STEM careers when it comes to women, when it comes to, people of color. And then moving into the workplace, though, one of the things that we're finding and that we're seeing is that these populations are leaving at 2 times the rate of their white counterparts. Mm-hmm. And that's solely for the fact that, and a lot of times they talk about the absence of support, the absence of the ability to continue to network, the ability to continue to develop, the ability to have that support and someone who advocates for them when they get into the workplace. And so really thinking about it from early on and moving throughout education and throughout that career trajectory.
Yeah, no, that's important. And it can't be a one-off kind of conversation. It needs to be fully integrated, as you both said, into the ways in which we think and talk about advancement and upward mobility in many ways. So I think that's really important. So if we can drill down to talk about the partnership between University of Phoenix and JFF, how did this come about? And I know that the real focus, of course, is around equitable economic advancement for Black learners and workers. So can you talk a little bit about how that partnership came about between the two institutions, and also kind of why now? Why is this important now at this time?
Sure, I'm happy to start because at JFF, after George Floyd was killed, and we looked at the kind of the what was happening to kind of Black workers in the economy and saw that they were almost cemented at the bottom kind of the labor market. They were in health, kind of low-end healthcare jobs. They were in food service, kind of working in grocery stores and really kind of in harm's way of not only of the coronavirus, but also of losing their jobs, to kind of automation. We decided that as an organization, we needed to do more for this population. And it was like, kind of we talked about like a national reckoning. So JFF had our own reckoning, and we looked at our data to kind of understand, like, what have we done? Where are our population outcomes for this population? And so we decided we needed to do more, and we created an initiative that I lead, the Racial Economic Equity Initiative. And we began to think about like who we want to work with, right, to change kind of some of the outcomes that we saw, the occupational segregation. And so when we began conversations with the University of Phoenix, I was really impressed by the work that the institution had done with regard to their Black graduates, right? Like some of the most impressive results like this institution has. And we began to have conversations around how we might work together to address, you said kind of why now, to address the, really kind of what we were seeing in the labor market, even for college graduates, right? College graduates, Black college graduates were more likely to be unemployed, underemployed, right? So I think that there was an incentive for University of Phoenix, and of course, Dr. Underwood will speak to that, but incentive for them to ensure that their graduates did well, right? And that really aligned with JFF's Racial Economic Equity Initiative that really was about really living into our mission, right? Our mission is equitable economic advancement for all. So if you have 20 million people that are not advancing, right, then we can't meet our mission. And so our CEO, Maria Flynn, really kind of had the organization double down. And this is not just an initiative that I lead. I am leading it, but it is integrated throughout the entire organization. So the work that we've done with University of Phoenix around kind of the scanning of opportunity, the framework that we're working on now, we are creating that support for the field writ large, for post-secondary and for employers, right? To really elevate the importance of us filling in that missing variable that is social capital. So for JFF's Racial Economic Equity Initiative, we can't get to equity by ourselves. We have to work with partners, and so it's been very productive. And I think that we will really amplify impact kind of by this partnerships and partnerships like this when organizations are joining forces for economic advancement. One other thing I want to say is like naturally, University of Phoenix and JFF, we care about all populations. One of the things that we want to do through this partnership and through this social capital kind of scanning and framework, we want to lift up kind of what it takes, to have Black learners and workers advance. And we think that they're going to be lessons for other populations who also struggle in the economy. So it's like good all around. So really, really excited for the partnership.
Yeah, I want to go to Dr. Underwood, but I also wanted to mention, because one of the questions I was going to ask was whether or not this could be replicated. And it seems like it can, like this model can certainly be used. I mean, we talk a lot about best practices and looking at institutions that seem to be getting it right on this front. So this seems to be a model that I think other folks could certainly look to in the future. But Dr. Underwood?
Yeah. And thank you, Jamal. And one of the things I will say is, my response pretty much parallels Michael's, right? And so the onset of this pandemic really had us as a university, looking at what's next. And we know, and I don't need to go into the details, as a country, we went into this panic mode of sorts, at the onset of this pandemic. And then looking at, the workplace, we saw workplaces do this quick transition into this virtual, environment and this virtual working environment. And people were talking about this concept of, now this new normal and what does that look like for us as a society. But I think that it gave organizations opportunity to also look at and come back to the essence of DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And what does that look like in this new workplace? And as we rethink what work looks like within the new normal, also looking at these elements that may be missing. And one of them was, social capital. And one of them was also looking at, the impact on those that had historically been underrepresented in the workplace. And so, at the University of Phoenix, through the Career Institute, we came up and we started doing large scale research, trying to figure out, what's going on in this workplace. How has the workplace been impacted? And then providing some clear guidance, for organizations on this is what we're seeing, and this is what you can use as some reputable research as you're looking at making, new strategies and new decisions. And so we did come up with the 2021 Career Optimism Index that came out of research on the workplace. And we found there that, out of half of those surveyed within this study, they really didn't see a clear path, at this point for advancing their careers. And specifically, half of the American workers felt that they did not have someone in their professional lives who advocated for them as they're starting to think, about their careers. But then in 2022, we did another study because we got some really good information from the 2021 study and through that index. So we did another study to go a bit deeper into this. And what we specifically found was that for people of color who were surveyed in this research, and specifically Black Americans, 61% felt that they were living paycheck to paycheck, right? And that people of color, another thing that came out of this, people of color were more likely to feel that they were replaceable at work compared to their white counterparts. So we knew we wanted to dig a bit deeper into this, specifically, knowing that, and Jamal, I know you heard about this great resignation, right? We have this great resignation and people are having this thought around what does work look like at this point in time for them? And they're making these decisions on, do I leave? Do I stay? What's my next move going to be? But however, that great resignation didn't look the same for women and people of color, right? Because when we're talking about the impact of this pandemic, the impact of this time on women and people of color, there were actions that were not so voluntary. Right? When we talk about those who were most impacted and left the workplace, we saw women and people of color, those frontline workers. We saw, people in lower socioeconomic classes that were more impacted and left in an involuntary kind of way. And so now knowing that we have this gap and we have this absence, wanting to know what can we do to help? What do we do to provide guidance as a practitioner institution and this university that creates, these individuals that are able to go out and impact the workplace as practitioners? How do we do this better? How do we help others to do this? And how do we help the workplace as they're making these decisions? And getting into, our relationship with JFF, it just felt like in talking about this and specifically talking about, what's the absence here, we quickly came to, social capital as being something that was needed and we needed to have additional conversation about, but then being able to work together in this space, it just felt like JFF was that natural fit for us.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And of course, we all love research. But again, the call to action is what do we do with that research and how can we impact the lives of individuals in a way that is positive, I think is so very important. And Dr. Underwood, you talked about, again, there needing to be almost a paradigm shift in terms of thinking about culture and climate as well, because again, you can't talk about these issues if people feel a certain way, if they don't feel respected, if they don't feel valued. That's really important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So talk to me a little bit about the timeline of this. Obviously, what's the next steps? I mean, I know the launch has happened. Where are we at this point in terms of what's next with this partnership?
I'm happy to share a little bit, unless Dr. Underwood wants to go.
Oh, please.
So we've collaborated. We've put together a stellar advisory committee. They've advised us. We've published a scan that we released at our Horizons Conference, JFS National Conference. Dr. Underwood and I were able to do that together in New Orleans, which was terrific. We are currently working on a framework. So how do you kind of put these kind of principles into practice, both employer and post-secondary institutions? How do you actually kind of help build kind of professional social capital? And we are planning a convening for the fall to really kind of put the finishing touches on that framework with the support of the advisory committee. And subsequently, we'll be publishing that framework. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Underwood for her thoughts. But we're really excited about really supporting the field, right? This is a partnership. We are partnering to support the field. We want to create support to build professional social capital for Black learners and workers at scale. So that's the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that, and thank you so much, Michael. I agree. We have to really look at, first and foremost, this trajectory. And right now we're kind of really focused on this, higher education piece leading into, the workplace and what does that look like? But then, also knowing that, at some point in time, there may be the opportunity in the future to look at this full trajectory, from when we talk about K through 12, moving into higher education, moving into the workplace, but definitely, looking at creating opportunities for stakeholders in this process to really talk about, what's my piece? What role do I play? We often put the onus on students of color and Black students. We put the onus on them to find the resources. You should know where the resources are. You should know where these connections can be made. But then also, where does the onus come from higher education? Where does it come from, the workplace and those organizations? And so, being able to have this conversation at a level that really brings everybody into the conversation and allows everybody the opportunity to strategically and critically, evaluate what can I do in this situation and where are those gaps that may exist, if I'm a manager or if I'm an organizational leader, am I first and foremost reflecting on this piece of, where is there some type of absence? And where can I best, dedicate resources, better dedicate efforts, equitable policies and practices and put them in play, so therefore it's a partnership of, your employees, your Black employees, and the organization of looking to fill those gaps and leverage, resources to better create situations where, our Black employees, Black students, see that ability and that way to advance. Yeah. But again, and I have to stress it, without the willingness to look at equity, without equity within organizations, without equity in higher education, without equity, just looking at this process overall, societal, workplace, organizational, how does that work? Yeah. Right. So it goes hand in hand, both looking at social capital in the space and in the equitable place that allows it to flourish and allows it to develop and allows those resources to be.
Yeah. I mean, and what you've outlined really, I think, gets at the heart of systemic and structural change, which I think is so important, is at the heart of this conversation. And so when those findings are published, I hope that you all will come back on this podcast so we can have another conversation, because again, I anticipate that this will be a conversation that we'll need to have over a long period of time, particularly as you all are engaged in this research. Any final comments that you want to make, each one of you, about anything that we didn't cover? So, Michael?
Yeah, I'd be remiss not to mention that it's really important to understand that social capital is, it's not to suggest that Black learners don't have social capital. Like, that's the first kind of pillar. We actually elevate current assets. We help them understand like all of the capital that they bring. So I think that that's really important. We don't want to suggest that they don't have social capital. The second piece is it's really critical to understand that professional social capital for Black learners and workers is about connecting over sameness and difference. Sameness with regard to representation, you know, it's really important, say, for a learner that comes into University of Phoenix to see a Dr. Underwood, right? But that, it can't stop there, right? Typically, you know, people of the same networks, right, or say similar backgrounds have similar information, right? It's really important to also connect across difference. So it's really important when we talk about advancing Black learners and workers. There's actually a piece out in the Times right now that looks at some research that Raj Chetty did at Opportunity Insights, and it talks about the importance of relationships across kind of income, right? And so it's again, it's connections across sameness, right? Elevating assets, right? But also it's critical to make connections across difference. And I think that that is really, really important.
Yeah, no, those are all important points. Dr. Underwood?
Well, I definitely agree with Michael, of course. But, you know, one of the things that, you know, really stressing here is that, again, equity is important. Getting into that sense of where, you know, students, where workers, they feel that they belong in these organizations. They feel that they can advance and thrive within organizations. You know, that's a part of feeling that I belong and I'm a valuable asset to this organization. And so definitely hoping that, you know, through these additional conversations and even through this conversation here, you know, people are thinking about, you know, given my role, how do I help support these ongoing networks, and how do I help to strengthen these networks? Because oftentimes, you know, when we say, you know, people of color, when we think of, you know, women in the workplace, but specifically here, you know, Black students and Black workers, you know, well, that's something that they'll figure out or they'll take care of. And then, you know, really recognizing that we all, you know, play a role in this as organizations, as educators. You know, we all have a responsibility here. And I think that when we start thinking about our social responsibility in this space and in this area, you know, definitely looking at how we help to continue to develop these networks around social capital, you know, for people of color and specifically for Black students and workers is important.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Well, thank you both for your time and for your insight. I certainly learned so much from engaging with you all today. So, Mr. Michael Collins, Vice President for Jobs for the Future, and Dr. Kimberly Underwood, faculty member, research chair at the University of Phoenix. I thank you for your time, and we look forward to continuing to follow this partnership and amplifying it in the pages of diverse issues in higher education. Thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.